Welcome to the City Council's June 18th special City Council meeting. This is a teleconference meeting with City Council, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I would like to first introduce City Council members present: Vice Mayor Drew Combs, City Council Member Betsy Nash, and City Council Member Ray Mueller. Staff present include our City Manager, Starla Jerome Robinson, our Interim City Attorney, Cara Silver, and our City Clerk, Judy Herron. Ms. Herron, would you please provide instructions to the City Council and members of the public on how this meeting will proceed?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor and members of the City Council. At this time, we ask that members of the City Council remain on screen, engaging their webcams and microphones. Staff will come on screen for presentations and responses to City Council questions. For the public comment portion, if a member of the public wishes to speak on an item, the mayor will call for public comment. You can engage that hand feature. It's on the top right of your screen. That'll alert us that you have a public comment. We'll have the opportunity to open up your microphone and you can address the City Council at that time. That completes the instructions for this evening, Mayor Taylor. You may continue.
Thank you, Ms. Herron. All right, the item on the agenda, report from our closed session. The City Council's direction to staff regarding actions the city can take in its response to residents and visitors' concerns regarding the police department. And at this time, since we just came from our town hall, I just wanted to offer City Council members some space to be able to discuss anything that they heard. I brought this to the council because of the amount of people that have reached out to me recently, and also the number of emails that we received on CCN. There was almost 80 in a, I think, 5-day period that was specific to Menlo Park residents. There were also additional emails sent to individual council members as well. But the 80 emails that I'm looking at between May 1st and in June that are on CCN is a reason why we are discussing this in public. There are concerns that we need to address. There are two sides to this. Well, actually, there's not really two sides, but just thinking about a comment that was made by one of our police officers at the town hall. And there is not an intention to look at this from one side. The intention is to look at whatever the concerns are comprehensively. There is an issue locally, according to residents and also people that drive through Menlo Park, and there's also an issue nationally. So the City Council needs to respond to concerns. And at this time, if there's anyone on the council that would like to express any thoughts that they had around some of the comments that were made during the town hall. Councilmember Mueller.
Yes, so I just wanted to express, in reviewing all of the emails that came in and the comments of the town hall, I think that's what's been difficult for me to separate is people who are worried about systemic racism and police violence holistically, its incidence rate holistically, and then are applying that to our force as opposed to what is actually happening within our force and trying to get to the meat of that. And because of that, what I'm trying to figure out is what are the policies that we promulgate internally in the city in order to learn from what's happening at a large level, but also do so in a way that's appropriate for our own force. And I'm not saying that there aren't instances that are rough within our force, from time to time, because there are. And historically, we've dealt with that as many police departments do. And agencies that have police departments too. And we need to continue to evolve and become stronger and take best practices to do that. And I think that that's something that we need to do here. The time is right. But I also am concerned that a lot of the emails that came in were not pointing to any particular instance with our police department. There were some that did, that we can talk about, but the majority of those were people who were responding to the larger movement and then applying that to our department. And the reason why I have that concern, frankly, is from a historical perspective on council. I think if you were to ask Chief Bertini, or before him, Chief Johnson, you know, which council member probably would give them a hard time on council when it came to policy, humbly, they might point that finger at me, both from the perspective of license plate readers, tasers, when that issue came up, and then also, frankly, with respect to the police force, for that is the Facebook in lieu payment that goes into our general fund, of which some of that funding might be used for the Facebook police force. And I just historically want to, that comment came up again today in public comment. And I just historically want to remind people how that evolution came, because we heard that as a council on February 28th, 2017. And if people want to go back and review the tape of that meeting, at the 2-hour and 51 mark, that we had a discussion about that. And we had 3 speakers that evening. And in that discussion, the reason why I bring this up is because I opposed it. That night, the vote was 4-1, and I said I didn't think it was a good idea the way it was proposed at the time for our Facebook, because at that point, Facebook was going to be directly funding the police unit. But there were 3 speakers, and one of them we had 2 speakers from Belhaven. One of them was Pamela Jones, and she expressed gratitude for the proposal. She said it was a tremendous impact for people in Menlo Park. She thanked Facebook for always being a good neighbor to the Belhaven neighborhood, and that she said certainly having additional police officers would free up officers to serve the western side of Menlo Park, in particularly areas where there was periodically a lot of vandalism with that. But that it would also be positive for Belhaven, because now it would mean there would be 2 officers in every car instead of 1, meaning it would be an opportunity for less cars to have to come to incidents, and for Belhaven residents to get to know their officers better. And I heard that those comments that night. I still voted against it, but then I thought about that. It weighed on me, and over the course of the next 3 months, I met with residents in Belhaven, asked them about that, and there was support for this, for the funding of this unit. And so I tried to figure out a way that we could do it so there wouldn't be direct funding of the unit, but the money instead would go into an in lieu payment in the general fund. And if the city decided to use it for police, so be it. Or if they decided they couldn't, we would use it for something else. And and so we ended up voting for it that night. Now, something happened on the night of that last vote, and that was that 2 activists showed up, not from Menlo Park, but from East Palo Alto, with objections. And that has framed the discussion of that ever since. But at the time it was passed, there was support for it in Belhaven. And just this past week, and just on Tuesday night, and on Tuesday, I received a call from a long-term Belhaven resident, Miss Rose Bickerstaff, and she was very upset about the lack of funding that had been cut for the police department. And I said, you know, Miss Bickerstaff, I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate your input. And then she later wrote us an email, which you all received, expressing support for our police department and that it shouldn't be cut to the manner it has been. And candidly, my interactions at National Night Out, at events in Belhaven and other places with the city, is that a large portion of our residents, both in Belhaven and other portions of the city, appreciate our police department. Now, that being said, I wanted to raise those things to provide balance to it. There are things that we need to do to continue to institute reforms. I believe that. And I also candidly believe that, you know, unfortunately, and I call it like I see it, our chief can be defensive. And that's, you know, that's, but I also do think that he wants to institute reforms. And so I think that we have work to do as a city, but we need to approach this from a balanced perspective from all portions of the city, both in Belhaven, balanced viewpoints that we've heard over time, and also throughout the city. So, you know, earlier this week, Councilmember Combs and I sent proposals to the city. There was a Senate bill put forward by Senator Bradford, which now is I'm being told is being put into the assembly, that's being put to weed out bad police officers so they can't move out from department to department, or if there's a bad act, they will lose their post certificate. It's a good bill. I think we should be looking at that. The rubber bullets that have come up, I can't believe, you know, I think we should look at that. I think we should review our use of force in Menlo Park. And one of the other things that happened that evening back on February 20th, 2010 is Ms. Pamela Jones said, you need to start tracking race on your stops. And I think that's something that we need to do. I support doing that. But what so I think there's a lot here. But I think we need to unpack that. But so I've spoken a lot about shared a lot about the historical perspectives of what's happened with respect to council in relation to police officer, but wanted to provide that perspective. I absolutely think we should be delving in and looking to how we should put policies in place to make sure that we guard against instances of misconduct in the future. But I also think that we should, at the same token, acknowledge that there has been a lot of good too, and that's been evident in frankly at times that I've been against doing things for the police department, and long-term members of our Belhaven community have actually advocated against it in order to see those things take place.
Thank you, Councilmember Mueller. Did anyone else want to follow up before we take public comment? Okay, well, I will. So the way that I'm looking at this challenge that is in front of our council, especially in light of budget cuts, because this discussion needed to be had at our level, regardless if we were making budget cuts or not. There's a historical issue. And so considering how our police departments were created several hundred years ago, it was created to keep a certain community in a certain place, so that they weren't able to, actually didn't have any freedom. And so thinking about if a structure was built to keep a certain community down, and we still practice it, where there are still elements of structural racism in our policies, we need to be looking at all of our policies regularly, not just the police department. And so I'm looking at this in a way of how can we look at how to change how we do policing in Menlo Park. It's not about defunding. It's about how to better use the funds so that we're not taking, I don't know, a year or 5 years to communicate with our communities on a regular basis, and not just one identified area, but a comprehensive communication plan for the entire city. The questions and concerns that I've received were throughout the city. It wasn't just in Belhaven. It's throughout the city. I've heard from people who talk about how they drove through our city and was stopped, and what they feel is racial profiling, and people aren't reporting it, unfortunately. Whether that's fear, I don't know. I don't know. I just know that in light of the budget cuts that we've made, the concerns that our residents have, how can we can restructure our police department so that we are servicing our city as it's needed, and then we can include in that structure the reforms that are needed, that have historically been needed. So that's how I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the vision of public safety in Menlo Park. I don't want people to call me that live in District 5 or District 3 that say, oh, well, I never see the police. And then District 1, they say, I always see the police. And so there is an issue of over-policing. There's an issue of racial profiling. There is a need for more transparency with our data. These are facts. So that was why I brought this to us to discuss. And if there isn't anything else by council at this moment, then we can move to public comment. Ms. Herron, do we have any public comment?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. So at this time, if any member of the public wishes to comment on item C1 that is displayed on your screens, please engage that hand feature. You will have the opportunity to open up your microphone and you can address the City Council. And our first public commenter is Adriana Walker. Adriana, you are off mute. If you can unmute yourself, you can address the City Council at this time.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so my question would be that of Mayor Taylor's is what could we do to reconstruct the policing system and specifically speaking, racially profiling. I know I've reported one isolated incident in regards to my husband being profiled in his own place of residence. I have a number of incidences where he has been profiled, pulled over on the account of a taillight being out, and was then asked where he got his car from. How could he get such a nice car? And when we got home, we checked the taillight and it was not out. And another incident, we called a lady who lived in the area. A friend of mine was posting she was going to commit suicide. So of course we jumped up and went to her area to try to find her. We called the police and they did come out and they answered swiftly. But of course they ran his name and asked him what he was doing out there. It just kind of went from trying to find the girl and help the girl to who are you and what is your background. So I just wanted to know what could be done about the profiling, because I mean, a lot of it's scary. You don't know, are we going to make it through this? What do I say to my son? And we attend the National Night Out every year with my 5-year-old son. I've taken him every single year since he's been born. And how do I explain that the police protect and serve when here his father is being detained and cuffed, and I'm being cuffed at 9 months and made to sit on a curb, you know? So what could you do? Because it is happening and they are protecting and serving. There are areas where it's fine. And then there are areas where they're through here 3, 4, 5 times a day. So it's that would be my question. And I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Karen Grove. Karen, you are off mute and able to address the City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I raised my hand when Councilmember Mueller was talking and wondering aloud how much of the comments to CCN are because of what's happening in the nation and how much is actually relevant to Menlo Park. And I wanted to say it's both. What's happening in the nation is opening up people to speak, but it's historic. I know people who won't speak publicly, but have experiences being profiled, being harassed, being made to feel terrorized in their own neighborhood because they're Black. And there's even an important line between East Palo Alto and Bellhaven. People who grew up in East Palo Alto, they knew that if it was dark, you do not go to Bellhaven because the police there will profile you and harass you. So it's real and it's local. It's just that most of us are white and polite, and our comfort is more important than Black people's lives in a lot of situations. So, and that's less so now that we've seen George Floyd on video, and I, you know, and thank goodness, thank goodness that we're not being silent after that. So to answer your question, it's both. You just heard the previous speaker. There are many more stories that I've heard in confidence, and people won't come forward because it's scary. So thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Our next speaker is, let's see if we disengaged that hand, so we will go to Gabriel Wolf. You are off mute. If you can unmute yourself, you'll have the opportunity to address the City Council.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I want to first just say that I appreciate the mayor and city council's effort to hear from the community on this. I think it's really important to hear stories from folks who frankly don't feel safe. Fortunately, I am quite privileged and do feel safe here in Menlo Park. And I actually wanted to mention that I went through the crime statistics for the city for the last 10 years. And we live in a very, very safe place. One of the safest in the county, in the state, and in the country. And I think that it's important to consider that as we discuss the role for police and appropriate budgeting and staffing levels. Looking at the crime statistics, one crime has increased over the last 5 years, and that's larceny. The rest of all of the crimes that the police department reported have decreased by 12% since 2015. That's a great thing. And, you know, again, we live in a very, very safe place. And so I think we need to be very careful about over-policing, as previous callers have mentioned. The effects of over-policing are disproportionately felt by those of color. And I'm very privileged and fortunate that I don't have to do it.
Mr. Wolf, your volume is going lower and lower.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
My apologies. I'm very fortunate that I don't have to feel the burden of over-policing. And I just would like us to have a discussion about using facts and data. And I understand that people can feel unsafe, but when we look at the crime statistics, they're very low. And as previous callers and also council members have mentioned, we need to be tracking all interactions with race data to look at the other side of it. We may feel unsafe, but there aren't that many crimes. Well, those who may feel unsafe from the police, we need to track all incidents, and we need to track race data. And I think that point has been well made, and I look forward to the city instituting that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public commenter is going to be Adina Levin. Adina, you are off mute. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you may address the City Council.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so Adina Levin, Menlo Park resident, and I joined only a part way through the previous discussion and wanted to speak to some of the items that Menlo Together has written in about. So first of all, with regard to racial profiling and mentioning of police protecting and serving, I live near downtown and I do not feel protected and served if a police stops a miscellaneous Black person who is walking down the street just because they're walking down the street and are African American. So the ask is to have the police data portal collect data about police stops by race and by location, including the location of mutual aid calls with regard to some of the concerns about our officers in East Palo Alto and neighboring communities. We need that data in order to be able to assess whether there are issues and decide what to do about those issues. With regard to funding, we would like to see a detailed and thoughtful analysis about what it is that police do and consider reallocation of funding for some other strategies that in some cases may do a better job for protecting people. The example of police dispatch for someone in mental health crisis, and then also stopping the person who is trying to save their friend was an example of maybe where a police is not the right service to be delivering. So we would recommend that, and recommend that the police strategic plan be repurposed to a public safety plan to be able to consider some of those other opportunities. And then lastly, in terms of accountability, we recommend a citizen advisory committee to provide accountability and ensure that the voices of the community are heard in policies. Just circling back to the first, we have 120 signatures so far on the ask for the data. So we would encourage the City Council to consider these and other steps to improve safety for all in our community, including looking at public safety in a different way than only police. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next public commenter is Sudi Transcendence. Sudi, if you would like to unmute yourself, you can address the City Council at this time.
And thank you, and greetings to all the council members. I will send via email a list of items that I have been working on. And at this call, for the 3 minutes that I have, I'd like to reiterate a lot of the conversations and comments I've already had. One is transparency is key on police practices. In reviewing the Menlo Park police policy and several other cities, there are a lot of shoulds versus musts in these policies. So there's a lot of room for wiggle. And it doesn't really matter that it's relevant to Menlo Park or not. I mean, we need to set the example, even if it's not relevant to us. The other one, it has to do with the staffing. Service population versus actual population of the town has been used by the Menlo Park Police Department on deciding how many officers it needs. So it uses a service population method. I have not been able to find any references or to compare any other city that uses that metric for deciding how many. And in doing so, they're taking account, for example, the Facebook population, which is the same number as the residents of Menlo Park. So we also need to understand how we are spending the money. Our buying military equipment and body gear have no place in our cities. It's just wrong. And a lot of cities, and I don't know how, because I don't know, I haven't seen the information. I don't know where Menlo Park stands on that. And as far as reporting, I just want you to also realize that, if not already, that the reports that are mandated are only reports of use of force incidents that results in serious bodily injury or death, or involved in the discharge of firearms. Those mandatory reportings that they have to do to the state of California, they don't apply to use of tasers unless somebody dies from it. So there's a lot of other ways that police violence can be applied to residents and people that is not reported. So now the question becomes, do we always have to do the minimum? That's something that I've been asking for years, even when I was on the other committees. And the answer to me is that no, we should not be just satisfied with doing the minimum. And as far as civilian complaints are concerned, I looked at the data on the California government's website, and civilian complaints against police officers only provides overall statistics without details of any resolutions, just percentages. And these are still pending after, some of them pending after 2 years. Now the the record maintenance for the police department for Menlo Park only requires 2 years. So knowing what we know, that everything is always under investigation and nobody sees the light of day, if at all, for years, this whole 2-year period just seems, not realistic to limit, the data retention policy to only that much. And The other one, again, is a lot of shoulds and not musts. And somebody mentioned about disciplinary actions if somebody fails to follow what they should, which is like wearing body cams. Just in May, San Mateo County Sheriff's shot and killed a mentally ill woman in Half Moon Bay, and he failed, but at least that's what they say, that he didn't have his body cam on. There's no justification for that. So there's a lot of loopholes. And again, this is not about just the city of Menlo Park, and I don't think that people should take that, as an insult. But I think there's a lot of room that we have to really explore and, plug up those loopholes, and it shouldn't have to take forever to get this done. So I encourage and support the last commenters about having a well-informed resident group that is, have done a lot of research in this area to make this move forward fast. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next public commenter is Nicole Scarborough. Nicole, you are off mute. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you may address the City Council at this time.
Hi, how's the audio?
Perfect, thank you.
Fine, you can hear me? So I think the council members know my name from several emails I've sent, so I won't completely reiterate what I already spelled out in the emails. But the one thing I'm hearing from citizens is the concern that by reducing any funding to the police, that we are somehow going to be less safe. And I just implore people to actually look at the data, as one of the other callers had said. If you actually look at the information of our city, first off, we're very safe. Secondly, we have mainly thefts where police are arriving just to take the reports. And then the secondary thing is domestic violence, which I think everyone who's looked into the data would probably agree that we're better off sending counselors to those occasions instead of armed police officers. But speaking of budget pieces, as I looked through the budget in detail, and I have a finance background, there's so many areas that just have red flags. Like, for example, the $450,000 spent for the command center unit, which our fire department has one, our county has one, and our neighboring city of Palo Alto has one. I understand it's grant money that's going to that, but I would implore the council to review that purchase that was agreed to in November of 2019 and consider canceling that order. The other piece is just the sheer number of officers we have. I have a feeling that most of the citizens who are complaining about or who are fearful about losing officers don't realize how few calls the department gets. So during shelter in place, they're getting 5 calls a day. An average 3 of them are about theft, usually bikes, and 2 are suspicious activity, which may be racial profiling examples from citizens. So I would just say, as we look at these numbers, we need to think of, do we really need 76 officers? Do we really need 46 patrol officers for 5 calls a day? And before shelter in place, it was actually 2 calls per day per officer. And I think it should be a resounding no, we do not need that. And it's not a short-term solution, but longer term, I think that we should look at our force and if we should outsource it to San Mateo County, as San Carlos has done and Millbrae has done and Half Moon Bay has done, because the amount of administrative costs we have for the department is pretty ludicrous. And the final point I wanted to make, it relates to Councilmember Mueller with the Facebook piece. I was listening to the notes from it, watching the video and looking at the notes. And my understanding was that, and as you had just said, that the money would go into a fund that the council could decide where it would go to. However, in the last 3 years, the budget of the police department has gone up $1 million each year. And Commander Dixon pointed out in an email that it was from that Facebook money. So it looks like he is counting it as income to his department. And I'm out of time.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next public commenter is Kevin Gallagher. Kevin, you're off mute. You may address the City Council.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So what I wanted to talk about has kind of been echoed by some other callers. I've been very closely and excitedly following the progress of State Bill AB 2054, the Crises Act. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but the gist of it is that it is a pilot program that would provide grant funding for community-based organizations that deal in emergency response, basically as like an alternative to policing, like some other people have said. So CBOs who would respond to DV crises or mental health or substance abuse or housing crises. And it seemed like something that was just like a really exciting way to think of a positive alternative to, you know, for like gradually defunding and decreasing police forces. What can we, you know, create to fill? I mean, I personally don't believe that there would be a void anyway, but what can we support that would be better suited to, you know, meeting people's needs in a fundamentally nonviolent manner? I personally work as a social worker in San Francisco, so I'm not really familiar with what community-based emergency responders there are here, if any. But in my work in the city, I've worked pretty directly with some who work with substance abuse and domestic violence, and have had only like fantastic experiences. They're really amazing organizations with people who are very specifically trained and have a lot of experience in their, you know, specific fields. So I just encourage, you know, looking into that sort of approach here. If there are already some community-based emergency responders, thinking about how can we support them further. If there aren't, how can we encourage people to, you know, create some of those here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next public commenter is Andrew Olson. Andrew, you are off mute and able to address the City Council at this time.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me sufficiently?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Wanted to echo a couple of things that callers have already mentioned. I'm a 24-year-old Menlo Park resident. I've grown up here most of my life. One is to reflect and affirm that there is a difference of experience in Menlo Park Police Department, often based on location and skin color. When I was going to Menlo Atherton as a high school student, I had conversations with friends of color, Latinos and Blacks, who mentioned when police officers were on campus, I asked them why they would tense up so much, as I had never before feared a police officer. And they told me flat out that, you know, they're not going to fuck you up, they'll fuck me up. I apologize for the language, but that was their wording. And so I think it's important to remember that our communities within Menlo Park had different experiences of our own department. Additionally, I'd like to advocate that our officers protect and serve and put themselves on a line, but truth shouldn't fear the light. And in that case, I think open databases, as already mentioned, mandating all use of force, even those that don't result in great bodily harm or death, be reported with demographic data that includes race, you know, gender, age, economic status, etc. Additionally, as has been said in the national conversation, one of the obstacles to reform is often union contracts. I do not know myself when our contract with our police union will be coming up, but I believe that's an important part of this reform conversation, that contract does not prevent either police chiefs or the city council from getting rid of problematic officers. And finally, I'd like to encourage the council to look into our hiring practices. I have only anecdotal data on this one, but I have heard concerns from many residents that we have hired officers who have previous records of violence or excessive force for the departments. Unfortunately, I was not able to bring those articles to this meeting, but as we review our hiring practices and what role we'd like our police to play, and whatever role we choose, it's important that we are not hiring officers with previous problems. Thank you very much for doing this, and I look forward to continued forums like this and reports that allow us as citizens to see what our government is doing for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Our next public commenter is Reggie Turner. Reggie, did you want to make a public comment at this time?
No, I'm good now that I can hear.
Okay, thank you. So then our next public commenter will be Pamela Jones. Pamela, you are off mute if you would like to address the City Council at this time.
Yes, good afternoon, Pamela Jones. I guess I felt compelled to speak since my name was used several times. Back in September of 2017, I was being very specific to the completion of Facebook campuses and the multiple high density housing. It made sense to have more officers. I was looking forward to one vehicle with 2 officers. The reality is there's usually 4 cars with 1 officer each cruising the streets every single day. I also see anywhere from 3 to 5 vehicles at the neighborhood center, which is totally unusable for the neighborhood. So it has to make me question how the information that's requested and statements made, how it's interpreted. I come from a discipline where we are required annually to do a process called continuous quality improvement. Or another way of saying that is criticize, take a critical view of what service you provide. That service included having 40 students at 10 different hospitals on a rotational basis over a 2-year period. So I have a deep understanding of scheduling as well as being able to take a very deep look at the work that we're doing. On the meeting that I was quoted from, I also asked for some type of independent oversight committee, then commission is what I'd ask for now, because whatever advisory group that the police department currently has, it's invisible, essentially. And I know a lady called in and said that she was on it, but in the world I come from, if there's no documentation, it doesn't exist. I've never seen an agenda. I've never seen minutes. I've never seen an announcement of when it meets. I've never seen who is on that or how you would be able to get on their advisory committee. So essentially, if a resident has that kind of problem, it's something that's non-existent. I also back at that time on 2 separate occasions and asked for documentation of every single contact that they make with every single person, and to identify racially who that person is. Currently, they can have do 5 or 6 stops and have people sitting on the corner. And yes, I've seen that, seen them sitting on the side of the street. And yet you look in their data the next day or next couple of days, and there's no indication that they ever had stopped anyone. I found this true when they've been in East Palo Alto. The latest one was on the 29th of May. There was at least 4 cars there, no documentation that they were there. I am looking for transparency. I am looking for how we can do better. And this is a joint conversation that requires deep listening without taking the comments personally. And I think that's the key. This is not a personal issue. This is a we issue that is about residents of the city of Menlo Park. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next public commenter is Chris Adair. Chris, you're off mute if you would like to address the city council.
Yes, thank you for your time. I'd like to address the callers making vague accusations about racial profiling by the police and give some perspective from a police officer in Menlo Park. Just want to remind everyone that we aren't just the police, but we are the Menlo Park Police Department. The reason why these incidents that we're speaking of are so vague and non-specific is because, in fact, we do record every contact we have with the public. And I promise you that if any contact was somehow perceived by anyone as being racially profiled and they called the police department to make a complaint, it would be investigated. Our chief holds us to the highest ethical standards. And the narrative that I'm hearing here about rogue racial profiling through our police department just, in fact, is not true. Like I said, we video everything that we do, every stop that we make, and those videos are scrutinized. And if there are errors made, they will be held accountable for it. But again, I disagree with this ongoing narrative about racial profiling. And does that happen in police work? Quite possibly does happen. But where we work, where things are videoed, where we're much farther advanced in our technology than a lot of other departments, like I said, the caller said Truth should not fear the light. Quite honestly, most of us would be horrified to go out of the police department without our cameras on because of the accusations being made against us. Our cameras are our best friends. And we have absolutely no problem allowing whoever wants to see that. We encourage that. And I just want to again remind everybody that we're doing the best possible job that we can. We're trying to be as transparent as we possibly can, and we're open to any type of new ideas that could come towards the police department to make our job and our communication with our community better and improve that relationship, because there's clearly distrust, and in my humble opinion is there shouldn't be, but I also know that it takes two to make that relationship better. So thank you for your time, Council.
Thank you for your comment. Our next public comment is coming from Kaitlyn Maroney. Kaitlyn, you're off mute and able to address the City Council.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kaitlyn. I grew up in Menlo Park and I'm a current resident. I'm calling to ask that you defund the Menlo Park Police Department and allocate those funds to community services that will actually make our city more safe and equitable. In this council meeting last week, I was very glad to hear Mayor Taylor express an openness to cutting the police budget. I hope all of you will support this move to create a budget that reflects our city's values. Reforms simply don't work and are often costly. As others have mentioned, Menlo Park Police Department has a record of racial profiling and abuse towards Black and Brown residents of both Menlo Park as well as East Palo Alto. And the institution of policing is racist and classist at its core. We should be moving funding from police into community services that actually keep people safe and supported, such as affordable housing and community centers, particularly in Belhaven. I also ask that you eliminate the Beat 4 unit of the Menlo Park Police that is funded by and therefore accountable to Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next public comment comes from Lynn Bramlett. Lynn, you're off mute and able to address the City Council. Lynn, we're not able to hear you. Again, Lynn, if you're available to unmute yourself, you may address the City Council. Okay. So Lynn, my recommendation would be is to provide your public comment in the question field, and I can make sure that the City Council does receive that. Thank you. And Mayor Taylor, that does conclude public comment for this item.
Thank you, Ms. Herron. And for the last person that tried to provide a public comment, will we be able to read it ourselves, or would you have to read her comment, Ms. Herron?
Once it is provided, I will attach it to the agenda and then send it to the City Council via email.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nash?
Thank you. I was actually wondering if once the comment is available, if Ms. Herron could actually read it so we could all hear it live. And since I assume it will be a 3-minute comment or less.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. Ms. Herron?
If it is the direction of the council to do so, I can.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Will do.
All right, we're bringing this back to the discussion back to the council, and I wanted to know if there were, I don't know, what your thoughts are at this time, and if we want to direct some questions to the police chief, Chief Bertini, Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, so what I think when I look at this, I think that what really needs to be acknowledged is that we're dealing with is a relationship between the police department and the public, and specifically a relationship between the police department and people of color is what we're talking about. And we really are at a watershed moment in that relationship where it's time for those in law enforcement and those in elected officials to listen and acknowledge the way that people feel on the other side of that relationship, and not just acknowledge it, but to make institutional change to address it. And the fact of the matter is, and I will defer to my colleagues, but if people's interactions with officers on stops are that they feel afraid or afraid to report because of long-standing interactions, then it becomes very difficult to get a transparent read of what's happening and where your problems are in your police department. We don't have that level of transparency taking place. We already are up against sort of a stacked deck where people are afraid to interact with the police department than in the way it's set and based on past experience. Then they're going to be, in those instances when something happens, they're going to be afraid to report, and not just afraid to report because of retaliation, but also afraid to report because of embarrassment. You might show up in a police report or in a public document. And what we really need, what I really am interested in doing myself with respect to my colleagues, is trying to figure out how we can put in place controls and procedures to identify these issues and create, I think what was attempted to be created during the town hall today, but we need to create an institutional framework such that interaction can take place where people feel safe to share those experiences, acknowledging that the current framework doesn't lend itself to that in a way that's equitable from a relationship standpoint. And so, you know, my prior comments this evening, and I appreciate Karen speaking to it, but you know, it may be that my expectation that I'll get a bunch of emails from people with bad experiences is a false expectation. I will say getting a bunch of emails that are rote, or it's already pre-wrote, so it's the same thing over and over again, makes it difficult to weed out who has a real experience and who is just sending us something they got on a listserv. But I think it may be a false expectation to think people with real experiences are going to reach out and share those in a public email. So I support our council working with our police department to try to figure out ways how we can get greater transparency, greater tracking of incidents, of stops, to find out if there are incidents, if there is a pattern. And I would say to our officers, it's a relationship, and it may not even be a cognizant. You may not even be cognizant that you're doing it without data to look at and to review, and to on every stop. It'll be difficult to know that. With respect to Ms. Jones' comments, I apologize. I wasn't trying to single you out. I was really trying to just explain historically why that unit came to be and how that is, because oftentimes I get asked, why did you change your mind, Ray? I get, and I'm like, well, I heard from members of the community who thought it was a good idea. But I think that I think it does take transparency to do better, and I think it's also going to take. And I also do think that we need to have we need to put in place. We need to put in place guidelines now to build that trust. You know, if you're an officer listening to this or in the command staff, you think, well, this is unfair. You know, often in every relationship that you have, you will be there will be a disagreement. And it doesn't matter whether or not you think it's fair or not. You need to acknowledge that there's a disagreement, and you're often going to be speaking past each other until both people break down and try to figure out how to find common ground and rebuild trust. There isn't going to be a winner to that discussion. So I think that we need to put in institutional controls to acknowledge that and more reforms. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Mueller. I don't know if Vice Mayor Combs or Councilmember Nash haven't been paying attention to hand raises. Councilmember Nash.
Actually, Vice Mayor Combs, if you want to say something, I have not either. Feel free. Okay. So I guess, first of all, I want to say that there's, we do have to recognize, as everyone has been saying, that, or most people have been saying, that many people in Menlo Park are afraid of the police. And I want to point back to Kate Bradshaw's article, Menlo Park, People of Color Speak Up About Personal Impact of Police Stops, that she wrote February 21st, 2017. In that story, there's plenty of documentation about how people have felt when they are stopped. What I think we need to do, conversely, is get more visibility into the police department as the other side of this relationship, and to get more understanding as to what's going on. The police department, basically, I am looking for a high degree of real transparency and real accountability from the police department as we go forward. And I have a lot of questions, some of which have been added to by this meeting. One of the things I'd love to, from the public comment, some of the questions that I have from the public comment are the Police Chief Advisory Committee. I've heard about it sort of in the background for years. I actually have met one resident when I went to one of the police community meetings who hosted a meeting, and I found out that she was in my district on the advisory committee. I know nothing about it. It is completely opaque. I don't know when they meet. I don't know who's in it. I don't know anything about it other than that I believe it exists. That's one place I would love to get more information and get some real transparency. Another area is just, I'm happy to hear that every contact is recorded. Can we get that into a database with information on this, all of the data that people were asking for, so that we really can have, again, more transparency and more accountability. And I would think that that would be beneficial to everyone involved. And then we have more data upon which to make decisions. And then things which I came into the meeting having questions on is, how many police officers does our community require? Is it based on the number of residents? Is it based on the daytime population? Some people feel there's too many, some people feel there's too few. We've made some budget cuts, and again, some people feel it went too far, some people feel it's not far enough. Let's try and get some data so that we can find out how these how this information is assessed. We have beat maps. We have 4 beat maps. How are those beat maps established? Are they, let's review them. Is that the way we should be doing beats in the future? Is that the way we should be doing policing? How are assignments made to the various police functions? And are reassignments flexible as the needs change? One of the things that we've seen is many more people have security cameras. And so one would expect crime to drop that way. Because of that, one would expect us to be doing well. How can we take advantage, or actually, I know that the police do collaborate with the community and there is use of this, but just how does that affect the police budget? How does that affect the number of officers that we need? Because just how is that taken into account? Menlo Park recently sent 16 officers on a mutual aid assignment to Oakland. In retrospect, was that a good use of our personnel and our budget? We know that we were that's overtime. How does that benefit the city? Just what oversight is there? Again, is our police department budget right-sized? What consideration should be given to controlling overtime and mutual aid and education and training? Just there needs to be more visibility into all of this, all of the functions of the police. And I think that would it would lead to a much better understanding for council members and the public. What can, as has been said, what police activities can be handled effectively by non-police personnel? One of the challenges that we have is that some of the functions, the health functions, are run by the county, not by the city. But just can we talk with, we should talk with the police and just see what is, where do they think this might be, what areas do they think might be worthwhile, seeing whether we can get non-police personnel working on them. Things which obviously come to mind are, as has been said, the domestic violence, mental illness, homelessness. There's many areas where I think it might be beneficial to both our police department and our residents to take a look at alternative methods of handling some of these calls. And the police policy is 749 pages long. In one of the, in a couple calls that we've had, Police Chief Bertini has said that all of it's written in the policy. Well, we need to make that policy somehow more digestible to residents and everyone so that we know when people are saying, again, I believe that Chief Bertini has said that we already have adopted all of the proposed changes within the 8 can't wait, and that's wonderful. Let's see, it would be nice to actually have that discussion and see how is that in practice being handled. 2 more things, and then I will stop, and that is just what, if any, civilian oversight of the police department exists? Again, I don't believe that the Police Chief Advisory Committee is that oversight committee, but what do they do? And should we have a police oversight committee? And then how do we handle civilian complaints, inquiries? Is that adequate how we handle them? And also the tracking of them. So that's my list of things that I would like to be looking at. First start. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nash. Vice Mayor Combs?
Yeah, can you hear me? So first, I want to thank everyone who spoke and shared during public comments. I know for at least some of you it was hard, and you shared some personal experiences, and but it is so very necessary for this process that we're going through, that we do have those records of those stories of those personal interactions. And I'd also so thank you for commenting. I want to thank the mayor for being key in putting this on and having this forum and understanding that there was a need, and there has been a need for a while, but that this was a right moment to really sort of to kick off this this dialogue, this discussion, which I have no doubt will last a number of years. But now is definitely the time to kick it off. And I want to say that there is obviously an issue when it comes to the interactions between the police in our community and people of color. Yes, there is an issue at the national level, but there's also an issue in our community, and I think we all know that. I know that from just people who have reached out to me, right, to want to try to use me as some avenue. And me trying to be helpful, but then having people, even with my assistance, not wanting to see the process through to the end, not wanting to to share and have their name and have that experience out there. And so I do appreciate Officer Adair's comments, but I do think we have to understand that if maybe there's a vagueness, it is not necessarily a statement or evidence that nothing exists there, but maybe it is that the atmosphere we're in is where people don't feel that like they can come and provide. There isn't a forum where they can provide that necessary to go into depth in that experience. And so I do think we have to realize, and this is not picking on the police. I'll say personally, like all of my interactions with the police in Menlo Park have been positive. But I too am afraid of the police, right? Because I carry all those experiences and stories of specifically men in my family, and some of my own experiences, not in this community, but in other communities. So these are real issues, and this is a real opportunity for us to sort of think about like how we want to approach public safety policing in our community in a way that doesn't have some of this lingering this lingering issues of fear, and really allows people to engage and interact with those who in theory are there to protect them. So I won't go through the list. A lot of the people in public comment, and I think Councilmember Mueller and Councilmember Nash and even the mayor, listed a lot of the things that we need to be looking at, whether it's the mobile command center, whether it's the beats, whether it's police funding, both the level of funding and the sources of which those funds come from, because that also makes a statement, and we've heard that, right? That there have been protests in this community specifically about where the funding comes from, and there is a concern, and I think it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we address those concerns and provide a forum where people can feel that they're represented, and if necessary, do a course correction, right, on a number of these things. So I think that's where we're at, right? It's a long list, and for me, I think the question becomes then, so how do we get about going through the list? What's priority one? Is it like I said, providing some form or avenue different from the current one in which people feel that they can share their stories or their experiences? Is that priority one? Is priority one sort of relooking at the issue of the mobile command center, which I will, being completely transparent, I voted for. I was on council then, but maybe it is in the current situation time to revisit that that issue. I would say though that again, these are not easy, clear cut options. In the case of the mobile command center, right, it was mainly offered as something for emergency situations that would provide the police better ability to help the public. And of course now it's seen as in sort of paramilitary light. And so maybe that is the right way to look at it, and maybe that means that we should revisit that option. And also the whole issue is revisiting how how we engage and interact and service the community. But again, like I said, that can be really murky. There's not always clear-cut right and wrong answers. Someone mentioned maybe not having armed officers go out to domestic violence calls. Domestic violence calls are actually some of the deadliest calls for police officers, and they will tell you that. And so I do think that, like, again, not to say that is not a valid thing for us to look at and discuss and have facts, but I do think we have to be willing to come to this discussion with really sort of open minds for looking at the situation from all angles, right? And being able to reevaluate our own sort of biases and preconceived notions of the issues we're looking at. And so, again, that being said, I'm 100% supportive of this of this dialogue, not just dialogue, but this change, right, that we're about to start on. And for me, it's just that let's set ourselves up for success. There's a lot there, and let's make sure what's priority one for Menlo Park. And that may be different than other communities, but I'm certainly willing to sort of dig in and start to get some real traction. This is, I think, a real opportunity for all of us.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Combs. I appreciate everyone on the council sharing their perspective, their concern, and also hearing the public comments, and which reminds me that Ms. Herron did share with me that the public comment from Ms. Bramlett is available. Ms. Herron.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. So at this time, I will be reading the public comment submitted by Lynn Bramlett. I think part of the solution is to have diversity goals for the Menlo Park Police Department. This is especially important at the management level. Diversity would help reduce the problems that have led to this meeting. Diversity would have more police officers who can relate to those in the community because they would better understand where they are coming from. The police also need some kind of multicultural training to help them to better understand the perspective of those who are afraid of the police. As a teacher, I was required to take such a course to get my credential. That's because most teachers are white, and yet they teach a multicultural classroom. That multicultural class was a real eye-opener for me, and I think this kind of purposeful teaching is needed. We also need a culture of continuous improvement and to be open to input. Finally, we need a better city satisfaction survey process. The last one led to no actionable plans related to improvements. It was too much an affirmation of all is great in Menlo Park. I wanted to add that I suggest that the council establish diversity goals related to layoffs. I am disturbed to know that 4 police officers slated for a layoff are officers recruited for diversity. Related to this, many long-term temps are employees of color, and they are being laid off. One possible solution is to lay off the entire unrepresented management level staff and have them reapply for their jobs. That would free up money via consolidations, etc., and the money used to preserve jobs of the lower paid employees, and especially those who are Blacks and Latinos. And that concludes the public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herron. Councilmember Nash.
I'm wondering if we can hear from staff whether or not we can actually put any sort of, we have any control over the layoffs and having some sort of diversity lens within the layoffs. Is that at all feasible with our union contracts?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Our contracts prescribe the layoff process, and it is not, we cannot do it based on diversity. It is on longevity and seniority.
Councilmember Nash?
I just want to push the issue one step further. Is there any way we can do that, and what would be any repercussions, or is it just not doable?
I can speak to legal counsel and come back with a final answer on that. But
Just a
not tonight.
A follow-up question on that is, would that be our interim city attorney, or would that be Mr. Sakai?
It would be Mr. Sakai in consultation with our city attorney.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Combs?
Yeah, I just want to add, following up on Councilmember Nash line of questioning, because this issue has come up, and it was not our preference to go to layoffs with our policing services department. The collective bargaining units that represent police officers did not want to negotiate with the city or engage the city, which is completely their right as a collective bargaining unit. But layoffs was not our preferred course of action. It was an action of which we took after it was clear that we weren't going to get any concessions given the larger economic situation from the union. So I do think that it is important that is put out there.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Combs. I appreciate you sharing that. And I wanted to follow up, and I'm not sure how this information is being captured, the questions that Councilmember Nash had. I think Councilmember Mueller had some questions as well, and Vice Mayor Combs. But I wanted to add a few things, and one is, question, do we have the authority to define what a hate crime is in Menlo Park, as opposed to, do we have to follow a policy that's based by the state, or it's a federal policy as far as what a hate crime is? The second is defining what community policing means to the city of Menlo Park. I believe we do have control over that. And I just wanted to follow up with Chief Bertini, or Cara, sorry, Miss Silver. Miss Silver, come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. So in terms of defining a hate crime, there certainly are state statutes and federal statutes that define hate crimes. You can adopt a local ordinance that further penalizes certain types of hate crimes, and any violation of a local ordinance would result in a misdemeanor violation. So you do have some ability there to take a more restrictive view of a hate crime. With respect to I apologize for the other question was, can you
defining community policing to the city of Menlo Park?
Right. Yes, you have lots of latitude there in terms. That's a policy issue, and certainly there have been lots of comments discussed about should we provide additional social service response as opposed to policing. All of those are within your purview as a council to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any follow-up questions for Ms. Silver? Councilmember Mueller?
Not for Ms. Silver, I apologize. It was actually going to be for the chief. But if you have a question for Ms. Silver, Drew, I'll wait. Sure.
Yeah, I actually did have one question for the city attorney. This issue around sort of the policing units and what leeway and liberty the city has because of the different funding structures, mechanisms what liberty the city has to make changes in that has come up as an issue. What's your understanding when it comes to sort of, you know, making changes to the units or the police beats, you know, deprecating one, I'm sorry, I'm using a tech term, deprecating one of the police beats. That was the first word that came to mind.
Right.
What is, give me some sense, and so it's in the public record, what's your understanding of our authority here?
Right. So that's a partially a labor issue, and so I generally defer to our labor counsel, Mr. Sakai, in those issues. In general, council has the ability to set certain management policies with respect to what the level of service of policing citywide and per district they think is appropriate. There are other policy issues around resources, how, you know, providing a particular number and budget to the police department. And those are general policies that the city council has, but then the police chief has the ability to allocate those resources and deploy forces in a way that serves the goal of the police department. So in terms of distinguishing between what the policy decisions are that the council can make and individual staffing decisions that are more administrative and tactical, it's really sort of a case-by-case basis that we'd have to look at. And it's an important issue, but I do think that the council does have some input in that area. And it is certainly something that should be on the table to further explore if that's the will of the council.
Councilmember Nash, Councilmember Mueller had a question, but for the police chief, are you okay waiting, Councilmember Mueller, or do you want to bring the police up? Thank you. Councilmember Nash.
I just wanted to, if you think it's appropriate right now, just mention to the public what how our 4 beats actually are defined. And so essentially we have 1 police beat that is everything to the ocean side of El Camino Real. Actually, it's not even El Camino Real, from the Caltrain tracks all the way west to the ocean. Anything there in Menlo Park is beat 1. Beat 2 is from the Caltrain tracks to Highway 101 is the second beat. Beat 3 is between Highway 101 and the Dumbarton rail tracks. And beat 4 is from the Dumbarton rail tracks to the bay. So those are the way the 3 beats are currently defined.
4.
I'm sorry, 4 beats, thank you, are currently defined.
Councilmember Mueller, you had a question for, sorry, going back to Councilmember Nash. Was that a question for Ms. Silver or a statement?
No, it was more a statement just so that the public has some idea of that we've got 2 rather large beats and 2 rather small beats.
Is there any way to actually put the map up? I think it would provide some visibility if it's possible. If not, we can move on to the next question. Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, I want to talk with the chief. And, you know, is Chief Bertini still with us? So first off, Chief, I wanted to apologize for saying that you could be defensive. That being the case, I think anyone in your position right now would probably feel that way. And really one of the reasons why is, let's just get real, we're doing a lot of talking about what you do and what your department does. And I'm sure it's a frustrating and uncomfortable position to be in from your perspective and standpoint, especially being that you've taught at various academies and your level of, you know, how long you've been in service. And what I don't want to do tonight is talk past each other where you're not a participant, because what we're really talking about tonight is about a relationship. And to have everybody talk about a relationship from a community standpoint and just expect that our police department, who's also in that relationship, is just going to be talked to, is not conducive to building a relationship. And so my question to you is, I mean, everything that's going on right now, there are a lot of good cops out there. There are. My question to you is really from your standpoint, like, with everything that's happening, with all the emotion, what would you suggest to us as how we build that relationship from your perspective? Because I have to acknowledge that whether or not it's in some cases, obviously there are bad cops and there's been bad acts and that fear is earned. In some cases, that fear is present. And my question to you is, from your perspective, how would you suggest to us from the police department how we in this moment, how we build that relationship?
Thank you, Councilmember Mueller. So I've heard a lot tonight. I've heard a lot from the community. I've heard a lot from our elected officials. And the only thing I could really say is, I mean, I hear you. You know, all police officers are hurting right now based on actions that have happened thousands of miles away from us. It is very difficult to listen to. It is very difficult to see. And I think, honestly, there's only really one way that this conversation can go forward, and that's a fresh start. And I think that it's time for that fresh start. And with that, I'm really, it's unfortunate, and I'm sorry to say that I'll be announcing my retirement, and I will stay on until July 30th to allow the city manager to find an interim police chief. And with that, the city can go forward and have a fresh start, because it's obvious to me that I've lost the trust of the city council. And with that, that's hopefully that will give this organization a fresh start. I'm sorry, and God bless to all the men and women of the Menlo Park Police Department, who are one of the most professional police departments in the country. And I'm sorry to them. Thank you very much.
Well, I had reached out to you, Chief, because to talk to you about it, because you had my trust to try to figure out how we would go ahead and respond to this moment. So, but I appreciate your statement and where you are right now. So I'll go ahead and turn the meeting back over to the mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Mueller. And at this time, in light of what I just heard, this is the first I've heard of it. I'm not sure if anybody else on council was aware. I would like to take a 15-minute recess. Thank you.
With the city council back on our virtual dais, Mayor, you may continue the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herron. Councilmember Mueller?
Yeah, so during the break, I called Chief Bertini and we were able to talk. And I'm going to fall on my sword, guys, because this is, and I think it's evident of how emotional this all is. This is real. It's real for us, and it's real for the chief. And I talked with him, and he's ready to come back in. And I apologized because I asked in that moment, caught him off guard, and asked how he was feeling about the relationship, and he was honest with us about how he was feeling. And I made that comment earlier about being defensive, and that was insensitive. I shouldn't have done that. But the chief is ready to come back in, and I think that and continue working with us. But I also think that and continue working with the city. But I think I think it's real emotion. I think that's a real thing of where we are right now. And so to be able to talk about, I actually appreciate, first of all, as I was saying, how much in the question, how much I respect him and how much all the different degrees and training that he has and how long he served our community and communities on the peninsula. But where he is raw. And so that tells you, I think that understanding that perspective is real, and I can understand that. So Chief, if you could join us again.
Councilmember Mueller, I appreciate that you taking the lead on this, but I actually, after I had a conversation with the city manager, I believe that there are a few things that we need to do as a council and then convene the meeting. So in light of that, I respect the chief, and if the chief believes that a fresh start is necessary, I believe him. And I think Vice Mayor Combs made a suggestion as far as having a few priorities, considering how much was said today. And so it's figuring out some priorities and then convening the meeting.
Is the meeting convened right now?
Forgive me. What I'm saying is to figure out what our priorities are, and then we end the meeting.
All right, are we live right now in the meeting?
Yes, we are live.
Yes. So in the meeting right now, the chief is here and would like to talk with us about, those priorities as well. I still have my question pending to him about how we would go ahead and what his recommendation would be from a department perspective.
I appreciate that, but based on the conversation I had with the city manager, that was what her and I agreed on what we would do. I mean, all of this happened in the public, and so we can't turn the clock back. And it's not to say that we don't welcome the chief. That's not what it's to say. But based on the conversation I had with our city manager, her and I agreed that we would focus on what the priorities are based on what Vice Mayor Combs said, and then we would end the meeting. So emotions are raw. They're probably still raw. And I'm not sure if anyone else has an input. Vice Mayor Combs?
Yeah, I'm supportive of proceeding with, us sort of maybe seeing if we can come together on some priorities. I would say though, as I was sketching out like what I saw as sort of our way forward and how we dealt with this as a community, saw Chief Bertini as a partner in that process. And that's 100% how I approached it. And so I would like for him to be a partner in that process. And I respect that emotions are raw, and it's a hard time for all of us. But again, I do think, totally respect, Mayor, how you want to proceed with the meeting, and totally supportive of that. But I do feel that like I have to make that comment that like everything I said it with the mind that Chief Bertini was going to be a partner in that process.
Well, as a council member, I would still like to hear from Chief Bertini.
I understand that, Councilmember Mueller, but it's a collective decision. It's not one person's decision.
No, it's not. Actually, that's not the case, Mayor. It's not the case. When in a city council meeting, if I ask a staff member to go ahead and provide us with their input and discussion, I'm entitled to that. It's a city council decision how to vote, but
You're
not whether or
absolutely
not
right.
So
I
I'm
didn't have
asking,
a public conversation with our city manager. We had a private conversation, just like you
the city
decided
manager,
to go and
the
have
city man,
a
the
private.
city,
Councilmember
the,
Mueller,
the
the
city
respect needs to go
manager,
both ways. So if you're going to talk over me, that's going to make this meeting extremely difficult to complete.
Madam Mayor, the city manager and you don't decide who I get to speak to.
I am telling you, just like you came to the council and told us about your discussion with the Chief Bertini, you didn't leave and say you were going to have a discussion with him. You took it upon yourself. So I was surprised by Chief Bertini's position. And so we took a break so that I can talk to the city manager.
Okay, but this
So would you like the city manager to come on? Would you like the city manager to come on and tell, so we can discuss what her and I talked about as well? Councilmember Nash, you've had your hand up. You're on mute, Councilmember Nash.
Thank you. I would like to go to closed session, please.
I'll support that.
Councilmember Mueller, do you have a problem with that?
No, actually, I'm fine with going to closed session, but I do think it's not appropriate to tell me if I can speak, have a staff member speak in a meeting.
Thank you for clarifying that.
So before we go into closed session, we have to identify the grounds for going into closed session. Is there a threatened claim or lawsuit that you're thinking of?
Councilmember Nash.
I would like to go into closed session to discuss a personnel matter, please.
Okay, so that the personnel matter has not been agendized. If you can give facts as to why there is an emergency here as to the particular personnel matter, then you can vote to put it on the agenda and we can go into closed session. You would need a 4/5 vote on that.
Okay, I would like to put the recent resignation of our police chief as an urgency matter on the agenda and adjourn to closed session.
I support it.
Yeah. I do too, right? We all have to, everyone present has to vote for it, right? Right, Cara?
4/5 vote. Or yes, yes.
Yeah, I'll support talking about it.
So the motion on the floor to add an urgency closed session has passed unanimously, so that it's been added to the agenda. And Carl, I will leave it to you on how we handle the remainder of the open session, plus then coming back if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will provide the council members with a link to go into closed session. Thanks.
Mayor Taylor, do you know if, or even Cara, are we planning on reconvening an open session? Should I leave this meeting live? Or are we adjourning this meeting and go into closed session? Or are we just adjourning this to closed session and then reconvening this meeting?
I would vote we adjourn this open session meeting and not come back, not reconvene in open session.
Okay, so Mayor Taylor, if you could just officially adjourn this meeting, it would be most appreciated.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.